I didn't know my life was about to change when he said it so casually, like he was stating a fact instead of erasing 3 years of my reality. He looked at me across our cramped Chicago kitchen, coffee mug in his hand, jaw tight with irritation, and said, "You're being insecure. My ex and I are just friends. You need to grow up." For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. Not because I was shocked, but because something inside me finally aligned. 6 months of doubt. 6 months of swallowing my instincts. 6 months of convincing myself I was imagining things, all snapped into focus. I stared at him. Not angrily, not pleading. I really looked at him, the man I thought I was building a future with. The man whose needs I had prioritized over my own for years. The man who had slowly made me feel like an obstacle in his life instead of a partner in it. Then I said quietly, "You're right, I do need to grow up." He blinked, clearly confused. That wasn't the response he expected. He was waiting for me to argue, to defend myself, to apologize for feeling the way I did. He didn't realize that sentence wasn't the start of a fight. It was the end of one. I'm 31 years old, and up until a month ago, I truly believed I was building a future with my boyfriend. His name was Ryan. We'd been together for 3 years, living together for the last 18 months in a tiny apartment that always felt too small for two people, and all the things we never said out loud. I had turned down 2 job offers in other cities because he said he couldn't leave. His family was in Chicago. His friends were in Chicago. His entire identity was wrapped up in this place. So I stayed. I told myself that's what love looks like. Compromise, sacrifice, putting someone else's comfort above your own plans. I didn't see it then, but I was slowly putting my entire life on pause for someone who had already started moving on. The problem didn't explode overnight. It crept in quietly, disguised as maturity and trust. About 6 months ago, Ryan told me his ex-girlfriend had moved back to Chicago. Her name was Marissa. He said they'd stayed friends over the years, that it was completely platonic, that I had nothing to worry about. And I believed him, or at least I wanted to. I'm not the jealous type. I've never been the woman who checks phones or gives ultimatums or tells her boyfriend who he can and can't talk to. I wanted to be secure, confident, the kind of woman who trusts her partner because she believes she's chosen. But then Marissa started showing up everywhere. At first it was coffee. "Just catching up," Ryan said, brushing past me to grab his jacket. Then it was lunch. Then it was drinks after work. Then it was late nights that ended with him coming home smelling like her perfume, laughing at inside jokes I wasn't part of, scrolling through his phone with a smile he hadn't given me in months. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself that if I loved him, I needed to give him space. What I didn't realize was that I was slowly being pushed out of my own relationship. The night everything broke was a Thursday, around 9 p.m. He was getting ready to go out again, adjusting his jacket in the mirror while I sat on the couch with my laptop open, pretending to work. "Where are you going?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Out with Marissa and some people from her work," he said. "There's a new bar that just opened." It was the third time that week, and in that moment, I felt it. That deep, unmistakable ache in my chest, the one that tells you the truth, even when you don't want to hear it. By the time he walked out the door that night, something inside me had already begun packing its bags. I just didn't know yet how far I was about to go. Before Marissa's name started slipping into our conversations like an uninvited guest, my life with Ryan felt stable in a quiet, unremarkable way. I was 31, working in a mid-level strategy role that I had spent years building toward. I wasn't flashy about it, but I was proud of what I did. I liked structure. I liked progress. I liked knowing where I was headed, even if I didn't have every detail figured out yet. Ryan was different, more social, more impulsive. He thrived on connection, on being known, on feeling admired. We met 3 years ago at a friend's housewarming party, one of those crowded nights where conversations overlap and people are half listening, half performing. He was charming in an effortless way, making everyone around him feel like they were part of something. When he focused on me, it felt intentional, almost grounding. In the beginning, we balanced each other well. He brought spontaneity into my life. I brought stability into his. Our dates were simple: late dinners, long walks, shared routines that slowly turned into habits. When we moved in together 18 months later, it felt like the natural next step. We told ourselves the apartment was small but temporary, that it was just a phase before something better. That's when the first compromises began. About a year into living together, I was offered a position in another city, a real step up, better pay, more responsibility. I remember sitting at our tiny kitchen table, explaining it to him with a mix of excitement and nerves. He listened quietly, then said he couldn't leave Chicago. His family was here. His friends were here. His career was rooted here. He said it wasn't the right time. I told myself love meant choosing us over me, so I declined the offer. A few months later, it happened again. Another opportunity, another conversation, another version of the same answer. Each time, I adjusted. Each time, I reassured myself that relationships require sacrifice. What I didn't notice was how one-sided those sacrifices were becoming. His family liked me well enough, but there was always an unspoken expectation that I would be flexible, accommodating, understanding. His mother once said, half joking, "You're so easygoing. Ryan's lucky." I smiled, not realizing how often easygoing had become code for willing to bend. When it came to his friends, I tried to fit in without forcing it. Group dinners, birthday gatherings, casual drinks. I was always polite, always present, but never fully included. Ryan was warmer with them, more animated. I told myself that was normal. People have different versions of themselves in different spaces. Looking back, I can see the moments I brushed past too quickly. The times he canceled plans with me because something came up. The way he talked about our future vaguely, like it was an idea instead of a commitment. The subtle shift in his attention that I blamed on stress or work. By the time Marissa moved back to Chicago, the foundation was already uneven. Her arrival didn't create the cracks. It exposed them. He framed it as transparency. "I want you to hear it from me," he said. "She's back in town. We've always stayed friends." I nodded, telling myself that trust meant not interrogating every detail. I wanted to be the girlfriend who didn't panic at the word X. What I didn't understand yet was that trust isn't blind acceptance. It's built on consistency, reassurance, and choice. And without realizing it, I had been slowly accepting a version of love where I was no longer the first choice. By the time I sensed something was wrong, I had already spent months explaining away my own discomfort. And that made the truth harder to face when it finally demanded to be seen. The shift didn't announce itself with a fight. It slipped in quietly, wrapped in excuses that sounded reasonable if you didn't listen too closely. At first, Ryan talked about Marissa like she was a footnote. "She's just getting settled back in. She doesn't really know anyone here anymore. I'm just being nice." Each sentence was delivered with a casual confidence that made me question my own reactions. Then the pattern started to form. He began checking his phone more often, tilting the screen away without thinking about it. He laughed at messages he didn't explain. When I asked what was funny, he'd say, "Oh, nothing," in a tone that made it clear the conversation wasn't meant to include me. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I didn't want to be that woman who reads meaning into everything. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into quick drinks. And those drinks stretched later and later into the night. He always had a reason. We lost track of time. She was venting about work. It's hard for her being back here. Somehow his empathy for her always came before his awareness of me. I noticed how his energy changed before he went out. He'd shower, change clothes, spray cologne he rarely wore for me anymore. When he came home, he'd be lighter, animated, full of stories that didn't include me. He'd smell faintly like her perfume, sweet and unfamiliar, clinging to his jacket. That scent stayed with me long after he fell asleep, a reminder I couldn't ignore. I tried to talk to him gently at first. I didn't accuse, I didn't demand. I asked questions. "Do you think it's a little much how often you're seeing her?" He'd sigh, roll his eyes slightly, and say I was reading into things. "We're just friends," he repeated, like a mantra. "You're overthinking." When I suggested joining them one night, he laughed it off. "It's not really your crowd," he said. "You'd be bored." The dismissal stung more than I expected. It wasn't just that he didn't want me there. It was that he had decided, on my behalf, that I didn't belong. His friends started to echo his tone. One of them joked that I was too serious. Another said Ryan needed space to breathe. No one asked how I felt. No one asked why a man in a committed relationship was spending most of his free time with his ex. The narrative had already been set, and I was being positioned as the problem. At night, lying beside him, I'd stare at the ceiling and replay the day, trying to pinpoint when I started feeling like an outsider in my own relationship. I remembered how he used to reach for my hand automatically, how he used to ask about my day without being prompted. Those small gestures had faded so gradually, I hadn't noticed until they were gone. The worst part was how calm he seemed about my discomfort. Not cruel, not angry, just detached. As if my feelings were an inconvenience he didn't have time to address. That calmness made me doubt myself more than outright hostility ever could. I wasn't watching an affair unfold in front of me. I was watching priorities rearrange themselves, and every time he chose to reassure her instead of me, every time he dismissed my concerns as insecurity, something in me pulled back a little more. By the time I realized I was no longer asking for reassurance, but for relevance, the atmosphere between us had already changed. The apartment felt smaller, conversations felt shorter, and the silence between us started to feel intentional. I didn't know it yet, but we were already standing on the edge of a moment that would force everything into the open. The night everything finally broke wasn't dramatic in the way movies make betrayal look. There was no screaming, no thrown objects, no slammed doors that echoed with finality. It was quieter than that, and somehow that made it worse. It was a Thursday night, a little after 9 p.m. The apartment was dim except for the lamp near the couch, the glow bouncing off the walls we'd painted together when we first moved in. I was sitting with my laptop open, pretending to focus on work emails I had already read 3 times. Ryan was in the bedroom, getting ready to go out again. I could hear him moving around. The familiar sounds, drawers opening, the soft spray of cologne, the pause, like he was checking his reflection. My chest tightened with every second that passed. "Where are you going?" I asked, keeping my voice as neutral as I could manage. He stepped into the living room, adjusting his jacket. "Out with Marissa and some people from her work," he said. "There's this new bar that just opened." I looked up at him. "It's Thursday night." "So?" "So you've already been out with her 3 times this week," I said. I hated how careful my tone sounded, like I was tiptoeing around my own feelings. He stopped, his expression shifting immediately. "Are we really doing this again?" "Doing what?" I asked. "Having a conversation about my boyfriend spending more time with his ex than with me." "She's not my ex anymore," he said, exasperated. "She's my friend. There's a difference." "Is there?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like dating." He rolled his eyes. "You're being ridiculous." I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. "Then why can't I come along?" He frowned. "Because it's not your crowd." "You don't know that," I said. "Try me." "No," he replied flatly. "You'd be bored. And honestly, I need space to have my own life. I can't have you hovering over me all the time." "Hovering." The word landed hard. "I'm not hovering," I said quietly. "I'm asking to be included in your life." He grabbed his keys and his wallet, already heading for the door. "I don't have time for this," he said. "We'll talk when I get back." "When will that be?" I asked. "I don't know," he said without turning around. "Late. Don't wait up." And then he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where he'd been, feeling something crack inside my chest. Not all at once, just enough to hurt. I didn't go to bed. I lay there later, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound in the hallway, every car that passed outside, every minute ticking by on the clock. He came home at 2:47 a.m. I know because I checked my phone when I heard the door open. He stumbled in, giggling at something on his screen, thumbs moving quickly as he typed. He barely looked at me as he crawled into bed, the mattress dipping with his weight. I could smell her perfume on his jacket, faint but unmistakable. He turned away from me and fell asleep within minutes. The next morning, I tried again. "We need to talk about last night," I said, standing in the kitchen as he poured coffee. "There's nothing to talk about," he replied. "I went out with friends. That's allowed." "You came home at almost 3 in the morning," I said. "So?" He took a sip. "I'm an adult. I don't need a curfew." "I'm not giving you a curfew," I said, my voice shaking now. "I'm telling you, I'm uncomfortable with how much time you're spending with Marissa." He slammed his mug down on the counter. "You're being insecure." The word hit like a verdict. "My ex and I are just friends," he continued. "You need to grow up." I looked at him then, really looked at him, at the way his jaw was set, at how certain he sounded. And in that moment, something finally clicked into place. "You're right," I said quietly. "I do need to grow up." He blinked. "What?" "I need to grow up and stop accepting less than I deserve." His face drained of color. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done," I said. "Done with this. Done with us." "You're breaking up with me over this?" he asked, disbelief flooding his voice. I'm breaking up with you because you've already checked out of this relationship, I said. You're just too comfortable to leave. That's not true, he said quickly. When's the last time we had dinner together? I asked. When's the last time you asked about my day? When's the last time you chose me over her? He opened his mouth, then closed it. No answer. That's what I thought, I said. I turned and walked into the bedroom, my hands already shaking as I reached for a suitcase, knowing this wasn't a threat or a test. It was a decision. I didn't pack everything that morning. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too much, my thoughts moving faster than my body could keep up. I grabbed only what I needed to survive the next few days. Clothes, my laptop, important documents, the things that mattered if I didn't come back. What Ryan didn't know, what I had never told him, was that I'd been preparing myself long before that conversation ever happened. 2 months earlier, when the shift in him stopped feeling temporary and started feeling deliberate, I had rented a small storage unit across town. At the time, I didn't even have the words to explain why. I told myself it was practical, extra space, decluttering. But the truth was simpler and harder. Something in me knew I might need an exit before my heart was ready to admit it. I packed quietly, listening to the sound of the shower running down the hall. The steam, the water, the ordinary intimacy of that noise felt surreal. He was in there, humming, unaware that the life he'd grown comfortable in was already slipping through his fingers. I didn't leave a note. I didn't announce what I was doing. I didn't owe him another explanation he would only dismiss. I locked the door behind me and drove straight to a hotel near O'Hare Airport. Sitting on the edge of that hotel bed, suitcase at my feet, I finally let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. Not panic, not regret, relief. The kind that spreads slowly through your chest when you realize you're no longer bracing for the next disappointment. My phone buzzed around noon. Ryan's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. Then it buzzed again and again. Where are you? We need to talk about this. You can't just leave without discussing things. This is childish. I stared at the messages, noticing how quickly his tone shifted from confusion to accusation. Not concern, not reflection, control. I turned my phone on silent and opened my laptop instead. Here's what Ryan also didn't know. For the past 4 months, I'd been quietly in contact with a company in Seattle. They had offered me a position back in March. Senior role, better pay, real growth. I had turned it down because of him, because he couldn't leave, because his life was here. But I never deleted the recruiter's email. I never erased the possibility. From that hotel room, I called him. Hey, I said when he answered. This is going to sound crazy, but is that position still available? There was a pause. Then, we filled it, but another one just opened up. Similar role. Actually, better compensation. My heart started racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. When can you start? He asked. How's 2 weeks? I replied. Perfect, he said. I'll send the paperwork. When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall, breathing through the weight, lifting off my chest. I hadn't lost everything. I had been holding myself back. Ryan called 4 more times that afternoon. I didn't pick up. By that evening, I was apartment hunting in Seattle. I found a 1-bedroom with a view of the water. More expensive than I would have chosen before, but for the first time, I wasn't choosing based on someone else's comfort. I put down a deposit without second-guessing myself. That night, Ryan called 8 more times. I slept anyway. For the first time in months, I slept without waiting for the sound of a key in the door, without wondering who he was with, without shrinking my feelings to keep the peace. The shock hadn't fully hit him yet. It would. But in that moment, my reaction wasn't explosive or dramatic. It was quiet. And it was final. The next morning, I drove back to the apartment while Ryan was at work. The city felt strangely indifferent as I moved through it, traffic flowing like nothing had changed, like my entire life hadn't just split cleanly in two. I had coordinated with our landlord the night before, sending an email from the hotel explaining that I needed my name removed from the lease. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't overshare. I simply stated the facts. To my surprise, he was understanding. He told me as long as I paid my half through the end of the month, the paperwork wouldn't be an issue. That small kindness nearly broke me. I unlocked the door and stepped into the apartment that had held 3 years of my life. The couch where we used to watch movies. The kitchen counter where I'd cooked dinners that slowly turned into solo meals. Everything looked the same, but I didn't feel the pull to linger. The emotional attachment had already burned out. I packed only what was mine. Clothes, books, work equipment, personal items. I made 3 trips to the storage unit, loading and unloading with a focus that surprised me. Each box felt lighter than the last. By the time I returned for the final load, my body was tired, but my mind felt sharper than it had in months. I left my key on the kitchen counter with a short note. Lease is in your name now. I've paid my half through the end of the month. Good luck with everything. No accusations, no closure speech, just the truth. I was loading the last box into my car when I heard his voice. What are you doing? I turned to see Ryan standing in the parking lot, his car door still open, his tie loosened, his face flushed with disbelief. He must have left work early. His eyes darted from the boxes to me and back again. I'm moving, I said. Moving where? He demanded. Away. That's not an answer, he snapped. It's the only one you're getting. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like we were negotiating something. You're really serious about this. Completely. Yes. Over what? He asked. Over me having friends? I felt a familiar frustration rise, but it didn't take over. Over you treating me like I'm optional. Over you prioritizing your ex over your actual relationship. Over you telling me I'm insecure every time I tried to talk about it. I never gaslighted you, he said immediately. I met his eyes. You told me I was insecure for having completely reasonable concerns. You made me feel crazy for noticing that my boyfriend was essentially dating another woman. I wasn't dating Marissa. Maybe not technically, I said, but you were doing everything except that, and honestly, I don't care anymore. He looked stunned, like he was hearing me for the first time. So that's it. 3 years, and you're just done. You were done months ago, I said quietly. I'm just catching up. He stood there as I got into my car, his hands clenched at his sides. Where are you going? He called out. Somewhere better, I replied. As I drove away, my phone started lighting up again. Calls, messages, long texts swinging between apology and anger. He told me I was overreacting. He told me I was ruining everything. He told me we could fix this if I would just come back and talk. I didn't respond. Over the next 10 days, I stayed at the hotel, tying up loose ends. I met with my boss and gave notice. He was disappointed, but he listened. I sold my car. I booked a one-way flight. I shipped my boxes ahead to Seattle. Every task felt deliberate, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself one decision at a time. Ryan tried everything. Calls, texts, emails. He showed up at the hotel twice, but I'd already asked the front desk not to give out my room number. He sent his friends to message me, framing it as concern, then frustration, then guilt. He even tried to contact my mother. That part made me laugh, quietly, in the hotel room. My mom had never fully trusted him. When she told him to leave me alone, I knew there was no coming back from this. The escalation wasn't loud. It didn't involve screaming matches or public scenes. It was a slow realization, on his part, that he no longer had access to me. That the version of me who stayed silent to keep the peace no longer existed. And that realization hit him much harder than my anger ever could. The night before my flight was the quietest moment of the entire story, and somehow it hurt the most. I was alone in the hotel room, surrounded by beige walls and half-packed emptiness, with nothing but a suitcase and a backpack left. The city outside the window glowed faintly, Chicago stretching on like it always had, indifferent to the fact that my life here was ending. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in my lap, and for the first time since I left the apartment, I let myself stop moving. That's when the weight finally caught up to me. Not the weight of the breakup itself, but the grief of realizing how long I had abandoned myself. 3 years. 3 years of adjusting, waiting, hoping. 3 years of telling myself that love meant patience, even when patience slowly turned into erasure. My chest felt tight, like every breath had to fight its way out. I thought about the woman I was when I met Ryan. Confident, curious, excited about the future. I thought about how many decisions I'd filtered through his comfort instead of my own. The jobs I turned down, the plans I postponed, the moments I swallowed my voice because I didn't want to seem difficult. And the worst part wasn't that he chose his ex over me. It was that I let him. I replayed the nights I waited up, staring at my phone, convincing myself not to text. The mornings I told myself I was being dramatic. The conversations where I softened my words so he wouldn't feel accused. Somewhere along the way, I had started managing his emotions at the expense of my own. That realization crushed me. I curled in on myself, forehead resting against my knees, and cried quietly into the fabric of my sweater. Not the kind of crying that feels cleansing, the kind that feels heavy, like mourning something you can't get back. I wasn't just grieving the relationship, I was grieving the version of me who stayed too long because she was afraid to be alone. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if I had overreacted? What if I had just waited it out? What if leaving was a mistake? Those thoughts came fast and sharp, feeding on the silence. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the stillness. I didn't need to look to know it was Ryan. He had been calling all day, his messages growing more desperate, more fragmented. I picked up the phone and stared at his name lighting up the screen. For a few seconds, I almost answered. I imagined his voice, the apologies, the promises, the familiar pull of history. How easy it would be to slip back into what I knew, even if it was painful. How comforting it would feel, temporarily, to not be alone. But then another image surfaced. Him standing by the door, jacket on, telling me I was insecure. Him laughing with her while I waited. Him calling my pain immaturity. And I understood something with painful clarity. If I answered that call, I would be choosing familiarity over self-respect, comfort over truth, and I would be right back where I started, negotiating my worth in a relationship that had already made its choice. I let the phone ring until it stopped. The room felt impossibly quiet after that, but the quiet was different now. It wasn't empty, it was honest. It forced me to sit with myself without distraction, without someone else's needs filling the space. I walked to the window and looked out at the city one last time. This place had held so many versions of me, some happy, some hopeful, some deeply tired. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered, almost to myself, "This is the last night." And in that moment, at my lowest, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel regret. I felt resolve. Because even in the ache, even in the loneliness, I knew one thing for certain. Staying would have hurt me more than leaving ever could. And whatever waited for me on the other side of this decision, it had to be better than shrinking myself to fit into a life where I was no longer chosen. That night was the bottom. And from the bottom, I finally stopped looking back. The morning of my flight, I woke up before my alarm went off. For a split second, I forgot where I was, the unfamiliar ceiling, the stillness of the hotel room, the faint sound of traffic outside. Then it all came rushing back, the packed suitcase by the door, the empty space where my life in Chicago used to be, the decision I couldn't undo even if I wanted to. Instead of panic, I felt calm. I showered slowly, letting the hot water run over my shoulders, grounding myself in the physical sensations. My hands, my breath, my heartbeat. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't waiting on anyone else's schedule. Every minute that morning belonged to me. At the airport, the terminal was quiet in that early hour, filled with people half awake and wrapped in their own stories. I grabbed a coffee and sat near the gate, watching the sunrise bleed through the glass windows, the sky shifting from dark blue to soft gold. It felt symbolic in a way I didn't want to overthink. My phone buzzed. Ryan, again. Did you really leave? I stared at the message for a long moment, not with anger, not with sadness, with clarity. This wasn't confusion on his part, it was disbelief. He had never imagined a version of this story where I chose myself and didn't circle back. I didn't type a response right away. Instead, I opened my camera and took a photo of the city skyline fading into the distance, the departure board clearly showing my flight to Seattle. I sent it to him with one caption. Finally did. Then I blocked his number. The act itself felt strangely ceremonial, quiet, permanent. When I put my phone down, my hands weren't shaking. My chest didn't tighten. It was like closing a door that had been left open far too long. On the plane, as we lifted off, I watched the city shrink beneath the clouds. Chicago wasn't just a place I was leaving. It was a version of myself I was finally releasing. The woman who waited, who rationalized, who stayed silent so someone else could stay comfortable. Halfway through the flight, a thought surfaced that stopped me cold. I wasn't starting over. I was continuing the life I had paused, the ambitions I had delayed, the instincts I had ignored. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning around a relationship, I was planning around myself. When I landed in Seattle, the air felt different, cooler, cleaner. I picked up my rental car and drove straight to my new apartment. 1 bedroom, a view of the water, light pouring in through windows that made the space feel open instead of cramped. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, suitcase beside me, and laughed softly. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was mine. That evening, as I sat on the floor eating takeout from the box, My phone stayed silent. No messages, no calls, no emotional noise demanding my attention. And in that silence, I understood the real turning point hadn't been the breakup. It was the moment I stopped explaining my pain to someone who refused to hear it. It was the moment I chose peace over proving a point. And from that moment on, everything moved forward. I didn't stay close enough to watch everything fall apart in real time, but pieces of it reached me anyway, carried across distance by people who didn't know how else to explain what had happened. When someone leaves quietly, without drama or threats or ultimatums, it unsettles everyone left behind. There's no villain to point at, no explosive moment to blame, just absence. And absence has a way of forcing the truth to surface. About 2 weeks after I moved, I got a message from a mutual friend back in Chicago. We hadn't spoken much since the breakup, but her name lighting up my phone didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the tone. "I just wanted to check on you," she wrote. "Things are messy here." I didn't ask for details, but she offered them anyway. Ryan hadn't taken my leaving well. At first, he told people I was overreacting, that I couldn't take a joke, that I'd blown everything out of proportion over nothing. But stories like that don't hold up when too many people have seen the pattern for themselves. Questions started getting asked. Why was he always with his ex? Why had I really left so suddenly? Why did he seem more defensive than hurt? Then the truth began to leak out in pieces. He tried to lean on Marissa for support, assuming she'd be there the way I always had been. According to friends, he finally asked her if there was something more between them now that I was gone. She pulled back, hard. It turned out she had been seeing someone else the entire time, serious enough that she had never intended to be an option for him. I won't pretend that didn't sting to hear, even secondhand, but it also confirmed what I had already suspected. I hadn't been paranoid. I had been sidelined. Without me to absorb his emotional weight, Ryan struggled, his routines unraveled. Friends noticed he was distracted, irritable, constantly checking his phone like he was waiting for a message that wasn't coming. The same people who once told me I was being insecure started admitting, quietly, that they'd seen the signs too. Even his family shifted. His mother, who had once praised me for being easygoing, apparently asked him why he hadn't fought harder to keep me. His sister told a mutual friend she thought he'd taken me for granted. Those comments didn't reach me as triumph. They reached me as closure. Meanwhile, my life in Seattle was settling into something steady and real. Work was challenging in the way that makes you feel alive, not depleted. I joined a hiking group and spent weekends on trails that made my lungs burn and my thoughts quiet. I made friends who knew nothing about my past relationship, who met me exactly as I was, not as an extension of someone else. I wasn't trying to prove anything by leaving. I wasn't waiting for him to regret it. But knowing that the illusion he had been protecting finally cracked felt like justice without cruelty. No confrontation, no revenge, just consequences. The fallout didn't destroy him. It exposed him. And the most surprising part was this. The further away I got, the less I cared how he explained my absence to the world. I knew the truth. The people who mattered eventually saw it too. I hadn't taken anything from him. I had simply stopped giving. It's been 5 weeks since I moved to Seattle, and for the first time in a long time, my life feels quiet in a way that doesn't hurt. My mornings start with light pouring in through the windows of my apartment, the water outside shifting with the wind, reminding me that movement doesn't always have to feel chaotic. Sometimes it's steady, sometimes it's gentle, sometimes it's exactly what you need. The job is challenging in the best possible way. I'm learning again, growing again. I come home tired but fulfilled, not drained by emotional tension I can't name. On weekends, I hike with people who ask me real questions and wait for real answers. No one measures me by who I'm dating or what I'm willing to tolerate. I went on my first date last week. His name is Evan. He is kind in a quiet way. He asks about my day and actually listens, not just to respond, but to understand. We're taking it slow. There's no rush, no pressure, no need to prove anything. And that alone feels like healing. I heard through mutual friends that Ryan tried to rewrite the story of us, that he tells people I overreacted, that I left without warning, that I chose my career over love. I let him tell whatever version he needs to sleep at night. I don't correct it. I don't defend myself. I know what happened. I lived it. The hardest part of leaving wasn't packing my bags or crossing the country alone. It was accepting that I stayed too long. that I ignored red flags because comfort felt safer than change, that I kept hoping someone would choose me while they were already halfway out the door. But I don't regret leaving. Not even a little. If anything, I regret how long it took me to listen to myself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop fighting for someone who has already let go, to stop shrinking yourself to fit into a life where your presence feels optional, to stop waiting for reassurance from someone who keeps dismissing your pain as immaturity. I spent 3 years waiting for Ryan to see my value. In the end, the only person who needed to see it was me. And choosing myself didn't make me selfish. It made me free.